Hello, everyone. The title of today's episode is a very profound one. And so I want to speak about the repetitive cyclical rebellions in nature. Pretty much I have a very unique relationship with my moment of being in the sense that my mind is a sort of, possesses a sort of subjective existence. So for my mind, Uh, my body is its creation. For my body, the mind is its creation. And these are various modes of a dualistic realm. Now, to kind of get into this a bit more above the surface of the water, rather than we start from the depth, is the notion came to me pretty much that rebellion wasn't just a man made phenomenon. That was the consideration. I pretty much thought about rebellion and I thought, why did people rebel? And constantly, just I thought, was it only society? Was it only a social reason, a kind of disservice done to segments of the same system by one another? So I was thinking of rebellion, and I realized rebellion is when you reach the edge of your dimension, when you see a great waste of time. That means I remember seeing an episode of Black Mirror, the second episode, and I consider that to be a great work of film. Even the content, and not just the writing, but the notion is that when the system fails to either evolve, anything that resists change usually goes towards chaos. That which rides change, as if this fear, this tidal wave of fear that was hitting you, you're now surfing on top of it. You have taken, Poseidon's staff, and now the oceans listen to you. So I saw rebellion in different ways, guys. I saw the concept came to me. So when I think about ideology, when the way I approach concepts is that um, they are a bridge between the known dimensions of myself and the unknown dimensions of myself. How the thought arises. It's like before, it was only enough to just pay attention to objective phenomena. But now in 2019, with 8 billion advanced communicators on the surface of this planet, uh, it's one of those situations where we got to begin acknowledging subjective phenomena. And subjective phenomena is not only dependent on objective phenomena, it seems to be dependent on ways we haven't discovered the objective to be. So, what that means is um, we are creatures in our own conceptual domain. What that means is a part of nature on this planet opened its eyes, then started speaking, and then began claiming territory. The first territory, the self aware creature, before even having the consciousness of a human identity, is that you take a bit of subjective territory and your name becomes you. And once your name has become you, it is final. Now stories of you will occur. Now you have become a personality of acknowledgement. And it's not just fear of kind of death uh, that has inspired the evolution of survival in some sense, it's one of those things where it wasn't just fear that motivated survival, it was also to be acknowledged because there is an inner fear of a despair, of an existential nothingness behind all that you've perceived. And this is just the honest acknowledgement that our planet is hovering in empty space and we got to deal with it. So for nihilism can be a trap. Nihilism is like nothing, everything is nothing, nothing is happening. It's like when someone concludes nothing is happening in this universe, that thought is originating from beyond this universe. beyond this room, as if nihilists really have contained a universe in a nothingness, that nothingness they feel makes everything value like nothing. It's kind of like a sometimes the wrong idea entering um, entering your awareness. It must be maintained either by your discretion or you must just like ride the wave. So for me, it's as if you can't control chaos, but it's order. It's easy to control order. Okay. For example, it was easy for that military general to give an order, but it was not easy for that soldier to go into the chaos. Do you see? Or to even be chaotic. So the situation is that anytime you step out of your domain of free will, you become a servant of the loudest program. The loudest program is the loudest idea. So I want you to imagine like there's a town, and in this town there's a group of philosophers. They're all philosophers, notable philosophers. Now, all these philosophers, what occurs? Where was I going with this stuff? Sometimes when the music is too loud, my attention to my thoughts can diminish. But anyways, um, pretty much I wanted to give this notion of a sort of uh, how chaos is something we get pushed in when the right action isn't done. And in some sense, rebellion was a recognition of when the right action wasn't being done. Now, rebellion externally has limits, has incredible opposition, but inner rebellion means a shift of your mind, a shift of how your attention is composing your mind in the moment, how it's keeping it there. You know, they asked this guy, they told this guy, hey man, bring your mind and put it on the table. And that guy was like, you can't bring the mind on the table. It's like it's an impossible task to shape a field of intelligence. Best thing you can say is it's a field of intelligence. So I'm pretty much in this talk trying to ascribe it, try to share an idea which perhaps a viewpoint which has never perhaps existed. And this viewpoint is that we feel our behaviors are in the domain of our free will, but our free will is in the domain of nature. Okay? And nature reaches a maximum threshold and then it moves beyond it. And any system that repeats, we want to move beyond. Anything that is seen and then is in some sense seen again, like repetitively, it loses interest and value because the shape has been acknowledged. So pretty much people's boredom is based on how much the scenery in front of them is changing. Do you see? Oh, so then I remember now. So imagine that village of people in that village, and these group of people who are in the village. I said philosophers, but just think of them as people for now. Yeah. Philosophers are people too. Yeah. But pretty much what happens is that imagine a group of people, a group of neighbors who know one another. They find suddenly either an injustice happening to one of the neighbors or a friend, or one of the neighbors trying to influence all the other neighbors. Pretty much any sort of system that becomes suddenly changes the game to conquer mode. That's when your survival instincts should kick in, your subjective survival instincts. And what that means is, before thinking, find the state of your attention, acknowledge your presence, and then walk in the world as it occurs. And you have an option of either your free will can either lead you on a path of sort of a conceptual requirement. That means it's like you're either going to listen to your desires or you're going to remember a moment before them. Either the stairway to evolution is chaotic or ordered. We're trying to create an ordered evolution as if human beings were an effort of an unconscious part of nature to suddenly become conscious of its aspect and its parts and its segments and whatever. So for me, just the fact that we exist is very strange. Just the fact that I can be aware I am here, just the phenomena of consciousness is like this magnificent architecture of a building you've never seen before. And sometimes you gotta take your moment, not to emptiness, but to a sort of maximum, um, maximum space kind of filled out. So that's a terrible way to explain. So pretty much I'm saying rebellions occur when a room gets too crowded. And whenever a sort of disharmony begins echoing in various parts of a collective system, our civilization, whether we like it or not, is collective. Like if aliens attack, we'll all be like, okay, we can all like be peaceful for a little bit, you know. So in some sense, a lot of our differences are abstract. Those differences that are abstract, we should, in some sense, cherish by efficiently and integratively evolving them. You can say that like evolution is a sort of movement, you know, and a conscious entity becomes a point suddenly moving, right? Now this point is the beginning point. Your eyes opening, you being the conscious being in this moment, is the start aspect for many dimensions. We are in the creative dimension of this existence. Okay? There are dimensions of this existence that endlessly change, and there are dimensions of this existence that endlessly end. So one can say in early religions, if I'm saying an if, I'm not imposing anything, I'm saying if you take the metaphor of heaven and hell and earth, if you just take that metaphor and you think of things beginning, things changing, and things ending, it's as if me and you, okay, our minds are in a sort of heavenly state. They are in the first sort of kind of, oh my God, how should I say it? Heaven, hell, and earth are states of being, not per se states of just mind. Mind usually refers to the body that contains that mind. Usually, if you have a mind, the body comes with it. Unless you lose your mind, and then your mind kind of really needs to find itself again. Okay, that's the thing of stability. We're not on just flat Earth. We're on a changing planet. And this changing planet somehow allows consciousness to, in a cyclical way, have a story of life going on. And the start aspect is that things obviously, like everybody can draw, you know, uh, a sort of half a circle and realize how from the beginning of one corner and to the end of one corner, that is a sort of how life is. You see, it's a sort of progression. It's a sort of curvature of like when you wake up in the morning, there's nothing. Just the first waking moment is like a singular point, and then as you experience the day, the dimensions of the day open up. They open up based on your energy levels, your health, everything. Okay. And so the world gets filled with color, dimensions, meaning, beauty, da 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 da, until you get tired, and then you get close to sleep. And when you come back to sleep, it's as if from one point, this one point that suddenly became so many different points and it became like a line. Eventually, it comes back to being one point. as if infinity is centered around one point. Okay? Just look at the infinity symbol. You know? If you look at the infinity symbol, actually, you can see something very unique, which is a perfect way I can actually explain the mind right now. Imagine a circle like a sort of elastic band, and you just twist it, and you suddenly have an infinity sign. Okay? So we can say the experience of our infinite self, okay, is a sort of twist on ourself. What I mean by that is that a sort of change in the individual activity suddenly makes the individual activity realize the cosmic activity is present. Imagine Galileo realizing, like, imagine a lot of the discoveries of science were suddenly given to one person. You know what will happen? It's like as if, like, Galileo suddenly realizing everything we now know in 2019 and being like, oh my god, this world, I have no idea about this world. So it's one of those things that the evolution of speed eventually came to rhythm. Rhythm became conscious. As it became conscious, the self, the I thought came into motion. The I thought eventually became through a cyclical experience. Eventually became like, how do I say? Uh, it became conscious rhythmically. That's what I'm trying to say. Okay, our evolution had to do with rhythm. Survival often had to do with rhythm. Okay, and so these rhythms are natural. Some of them are known. Some of them have been symbolized. You know, but the majority have not. The unknown is much more than our knowledge. So what do we do with what we know? We just constantly recycle it in an effort of exploration. There's nothing else. It's so easy to kind of teach universal existence to children. What I mean by that is that you just put an object in an empty room, okay? Or you take a child to an empty room and you're like, how does this room make you feel? And the child's like, nothing. It's empty, you know. And you tell the child, okay, that's how the cosmos seems like. So it's one of those things where through an individual symbol, the metaphor occurred through a similar pattern of that individual symbol echoing in a much more uh, vaster symbol, more of a kind of long-term view on a phenomenon than a short-term view. Our knowledge is based on this short-term, like there's a sort of continuation going on. Okay, so I'm going to kind of steer this towards a better direction. We are in a sort of, our body is changing. We're experiencing a dimension of change, whether you like it or not. There's a physical component to you, and it changes. You know? Accept it, or I don't know, like cry, like not cry, but like accept it, or in some sense, like keep your attention occupied on your shoelace. Like, well, how long? For how long can you? You know. So so anyways, like it's kind of like I'm asking our species to first attempt solving the problems of the mind and orchestrating its culture about a sort of exploration, as if children should think of each of them should think of themselves as explorers. Do you know? And whatever you bring into society, whether it's conceptual, non-conceptual, whatever that has never been here before, that is added, has value. It doesn't matter if it's online or not. Sometimes a moment has value regardless of who's watching, and that's what we kind of say what living is. You're an energetic, abstract containment of objective phenomena in a changing room, you know. So for me, it's like this game of survival is extremely strange. The universe evolved in a weird way. Okay, this ambient mix is definitely from 2015, I think. Um, to continue, whether it was Che Guevara or other rebels or whatever, let me tell you the hollowness in ideology. Let me tell you of the terrors of how ideas have started wars on this planet. And let me tell you where those ideas arose from. And let me tell you how our history is just how creature has just experienced its relationship to other creature. You see, and I don't know how to say it, but it's like the war of worlds ends when the value of there not being war is more. So I'm telling you, we're oscillating between chaos and order, yet in this chaos and order, there is a structure, there's a sort of science project that took 4 billion years or something to kind of get here. It is the evolution and the continuity of the collective human spirit. And I'm not using spirit in a super spiritual way here. I'm saying you can say spirit is attention, is moving attention, and what that means is where's attention moving from point to point to point in an unknown space. What you are is a moment which is an attention moving from various points. This attention masks itself in culture, masks itself in society, masks itself with patriotism and various ideals and images and symbols. For me, I kind of realize the essence of my intelligence is present in the silence before my speech. So even though I'm speaking, I feel like there's much I comprehend from the silence. Because the same way in the TV show Black Mirror, the second episode, the guy found himself in this sort of cage of a fictional simulation, as if this messed up system, you're stuck in this labyrinth, you can't get out. And eventually he worked hard and he got an opportunity to get out of the labyrinth. But there, in that moment, it's as if like as you step out of one illusion, do you see this is a sort of inner chaos that approaches some people, you know? I mean it's natural. Like chaos is natural. That's why there's a way of looking at the world that disturbance never existed. But I'm telling you, I'm trying to get to the nit and gritty of the matter. This inner chaos is the recognition as you step out of one as you step out of the microcosmic simulation, you discover the macrocosmic simulation. Then you see the destruction or the inevitable hollowness of the hierarchy. You see pretty much a bad system, and you're like, damn, this evil kind of system that's kind of influencing the world. Let's say cultural mistakes, social mistakes, the greed of mankind, the greed of men, the violence of men, all these like kind of robots set loose to destroy people. You see these qualities. I'm saying it's as if like we can't avoid. We're animalistic. Our reproduction is actually based on us maintaining our relationship with nature and being animalistic, because even though we bathe ourselves in the luxury of a digital kind of era in history, digital luxury and all this, I'll tell you this. this technological kind of, we say revolution, or evolution. It's more like a revolution because it's a response, but um, evolution is like just random, you can say, maybe, but revolution is definitely it's a countercultural initiative. It is something that is changing something that was there before, you know. And rebellion is a system that, in some sense, it has reached the edge of its change, and it sees it's not changing anymore. It's looping. This is pretty much a bad habit. A bad habit in human psychology is a loop of inefficiency, and it changes. And this is very, it's not easy for me to say, because I am, as much as I am putting efforts to stay alive, there are moments where I've not valued my breath, you know. The reflections in the mirror remind you of intelligence and its responsibility to itself. You have a responsibility to your eyes by evolving them towards your natural clarity, towards your true nature. So you kind of get into this context where rebellions occur as a natural consequence. They are kind of like the end of the water in the cup has reached to the brim, now it's overflowing. And that surplus is not a surplus in a contained universe, it is an unknown experience. So you become a sort of, you attain a sort of playfulness, and you cultivate this the presence of your attention. You pretty much study the presence of your attention, and you realize you're the only, like the Buddha says something like pretty badass. He says you're born alone and you die alone. Kind of like, I think a lot of the thug mentality and hip hop kind of leads that way. But I think what the situation is that we are temporary creatures in this endlessly seemingly occurring material universe, let's say, observable universe. We are temporary manifestations in an eternal process. And as temporary manifestations, let's say even in this infinite process, the infinity comes across as elusive because we are temporary. We cannot avoid we are temporary, you know? And I guess I can, in some sense, update my view, because I was under the impression that what makes us different from animals is mortality. But I kind of realized the self has nowhere to go. The peak of evolution is where the beginning was, where the bottom was. It's as if you thought there was heaven, earth, and hell, but in actuality, what they are modes of sight to a conscious moment. And anybody who believes in religion is pretty much believing that their current sight in this moment after their body continues. That's it, regardless of what happens, regardless of heaven or hell. They're believing in a continuation of their current attention. So, which means they believe their attention is standing in a way where it can move between worlds, but their body can't. As if your ideas can live longer than you. Your mind can echo further than your physical voice did, your actual living voice. The child that stood on a canoe on top of clouds staring at the moon wondered if there were, as much as that you can, in some sense, stare at the moon in your own dream. You are the son of your own reality. S-U-N. You are the son of your own reality. That's when your presence settles in. When your presence settles in and you're kind of no longer resisting the world, you're I call this, like, I could totally market this in a very nice way. your ultimate intelligence sets in, you know. And this ultimate intelligence does not just power or ability. It is the responsibility. Your courage makes you responsible to act in a way where you are content with the world. That contentment in the background in your subconscious before it becomes the unconscious is dictating. Your archetypes is like we're the center of a circle, then there's another circle around us, then there's another circle. The first circle that is around us, we can say that is our subconscious. That is the edge of our consciousness where the subconscious begins. And the edge of the subconscious is where the unconscious begins. But because the conscious can never reach the edge of the subconscious, it eventually halfway point has to cut the line. What that means is your ideology in semi-conscious states shifts. It's as if that how much of your ideas are based on your chemical intelligence and how much of it are based on your mind's intelligence. You know, you're sort of the witness within how much that the intelligence of your inner observer carries you, or how much your behavior is influenced by the chemicals of the body. For me, some ancient yogis had this very profound view. They had this profound view where somebody asked them, "What do you mean about reincarnation?" And the dude was, "It's like how you change clothes, for example. Like you enter different clothes. It's something similar. You enter different bodies." And the guy's mind was blown who asked the question, because he suddenly recognized that it's like just like how René Descartes' influence is important to the enlightenment, to the progression of, of, of the stages of enlightenment to current to our current like towards 2019. René Descartes caught onto the dualism of the mind and body, and the mind was this unknown phenomena which had no container, and the body was this known phenomena which had a very unique, sophisticated, seemingly designed container. So I'm telling you, we have to shout the mysteries of the world, or boredom will make us not care for exploration, and that is the death of hope. The death of hope is when you don't try. And Wayne Gretzky, I don't watch much hockey for Canadian, but Wayne Gretzky has this quote where he says, "You miss 100% of the shots you don't take. Hope dies when you don't try." So the most important thing that you can tell tell a person is that your authentic effort throughout the day is the greatest approach to realizing the purpose of your life is to be it, to live it, to to allow the seed of your design to become the fruits of the future generations' lives for their clarity. It's like we don't have to just live for our own clarity. We don't have to just fight for our own clarity, our own values. We have to fight for all the values of all those to come. If we dare allow, if not if we dare, but if we choose to allow. If we're conscious enough to see that if you live for yourself, good job, you live for one man. But if you live for your species, you have lived for all. So how do you live your species? You align yourself internally. You first realize, holy shit, there could be so many linguistic simulations fed to me since childhood till now. So what can the person do? The person goes into a sort of stopping the desire by stopping the thought that they think they are. It stops when you don't kind of recognize the effortless ability. You're seeking an effortless view of your true nature. When I say effortless, it means no instruction can be given, because instruction inspires effort. It motivates it. So this is, you want to discover an effortless intelligence, but the world thinks it has to get instructed on it. For me, it's impossible. Language can be cruel because it can make the being believe that behavior has to only be validity has to only be in certain alphabetized containers, as if like that plastic bag where you take your groceries in, that's a word. Like imagine every letter, every symbol our species is in some sense drawn or created or whatever. It's a sort of container. Language is a container. It's a container that we contain ourselves as creatures, which arises then the inner perspective. Your mind depends on your body to be a mind for your body. It's like you need a world here before you can ask the question, did the chicken come first or the egg? So some people say the chicken, some people say the egg. You know what I tell you? The world. The world came first. So before we can answer that question, there's a deeper question in the making. So it is the nullification of false conviction into the raw experience of the clarity of who you are and have always been. It's like kind of very profound. Even though so pretty much here, I'll say it like this. The title of this talk, I'm kind of saying a system that has reached its edge breaks itself to free itself from the loop. As it breaks itself to free itself from the loop, one returns to the unknown presence of nature. People fear what they don't understand. This is like, it's nothing new. It's like a well-heard saying. People fear what they don't understand. Now, if you fear death, that means you don't understand death. And if we look at death, it is an idea which is the shadow of the light of life. As if light enters our eyes and it shows us the world, but darkness enters and it takes away the world. So you can say the first time human beings experienced like night and day, it was like an apocalypse for the creature. I find that we're going to experience a sort of rebellion in entertainment and education in these sectors of just global civilization all around the world. The educational system will suddenly be seen as one that rather than adjusting to the student requires the student to adjust to it. So each student has a certain ability of that adjustment. As if people are running to knowledge, knowledge is not running to people. Imagine if right now, we should create an educational system, just imagine this, that if we were under attack by aliens and the whole species and humanity had united, you see, and we were in this situation where we had a defense mechanism we had some sort of, let's say, giant glass or wave or some force field defending the whole society or something from these alien invaders, we would want to have our educational system in that society, okay, in this sci-fi society, to want to give the most clearest data and exact information of what's going on in the world to the children. There's no time to lose. Our knowledge is at war with the unknown. Our evolution is in the making for the first time in the domain of our free will. But the playful thing is that it's the free will of 8 billion human beings that dictates where mankind goes. Ideas are shapes. Shapes are the soul of images. Yeah, shapes are kind of like the soul of the image, and color is the mind of it. I'm being like hyper metaphoric and spiritual here, guys. So eventually, I find that in 2019, where we're heading, I don't know how accurate I could be, but I have a feeling. So I'm trying to put words to that feeling. And I feel like we're going towards an era where we have to not just be cautious of the saber-toothed tiger, you know, or just our bank accounts dying, but it's going to be one where we have to try to protect the natural aspects of our intelligence from a society that is, in some sense, pulling us in towards a technological existence. A technological existence is important, yet the nature is important too. If AI destroys us, we pretty much choked ourselves out by creating this box and sealing this technological box and sealing ourselves in. This is the kind of I call it one of the great problems of mankind. It's one of those constant challenges from the unknown, and it's the notion of the simulation. So we're going to be in such loops of repetitive social and cultural behavior that eventually people will break out of the simulation, similar to a caterpillar kind of going through a metamorphosis and becoming a butterfly. As far as the caterpillar is concerned, it has evolved. But in a higher dimension, when we look at the caterpillar, we're like, holy shit, this caterpillar, as far as when it became the butterfly, as far as it's concerned, the caterpillar never existed. Do you see? So I'm saying that we in a higher dimension know that the caterpillar became a butterfly, but the caterpillar cannot know it became a butterfly, and the butterfly cannot know it was a caterpillar. Or they were always one. It was only this. It was the same site that evolved in the creature. So the ends of consequence is kind of reaching the edge of the simulation. Whether the simulation is linguistic, whether it is objective, the best advice I can tell people is don't play with truth, don't chase the butterfly, sit, be still and silent, and allow the butterfly. The butterfly will land on your forehead. Your mind will awaken. When it awakens, suddenly it has awakened to a world where it, like from your own original, uh, from the core, honest presence of your being, all reality administers itself, rather from the surface of you believing you're a thought, and the easiest way to continue to be inefficient is by blaming it on efficiency. So it's kind of like the moment somebody does something wrong to the civilization, they should take a vow of silence. Because in silence, the mind settles itself, the mind regroups. Your intelligence realigns to your attention. It's a remarkable thing. We're not just objective phenomena, we're subjective and beyond that thing. because I feel we don't have the language. We don't have the language to explain our truth, even if we found it. So it means it's non-conceptual or it is beyond our eyes. Either way, our world has its end, and our destiny is based on the design of the world. That means I thought, oh my God, I believe in the idea of destiny, but if there was no world, would there still be destiny? And I realized not the hollowness of ideas, but I noticed the transcendental presence of attention within all phenomena. That has been my greatest discovery when I have reached the edge of a thought by going to the extremes of both sides of the polarity and duality. That means this is a sort of you can call it a way to wake up the sleeping giant that is your imagination. Okay, and how you do that, this is my view, is that you must first enter honesty, enter the honest lands, the pure lands of your presence. You got to be able to do nothing and see what you are first, and then conscious action can arise. And the biggest issue also with guilt is the notion of sacrifice. That means if you don't know your full value and you feel guilty based on a limited belief, you will sacrifice the whole value for the limited. You got to kind of realize our minds are animating the world into structure, into significance. This significance is dependent on the most important idea in our species, which is efficient vision. These two words are so important. They are also as important as the word self-awareness. And you can put a dash in between if you like. And that dash is probably the same dash as you find in people's graves when it says the years they were alive and when they died. What that means is between heaven and hell, there was a changing world. What I noticed about what heaven and hell both had in common was their repetitive nature. One was eternally good. One was sorry, not eternally. One was endlessly good. One was endlessly bad, and in between was earth. So you are a present moment. You're the self in between a good self, bad self, whatever way you want to paint the world for the day. In terms. Now, another sort of, um, I'm going to read some things I've kind of wrote on a piece of paper here. I kind of decided to kind of add more dimensions to to kind of increase the depth of, my exploration into uncharted subjective territory. So I'm just going to read it, you guys just listen. The evolution of speed is rhythm. We are conscious rhythms, in quotations, in nature. The evolution of speed is rhythm. We are conscious rhythms in nature. As our evolution accelerates, we become conscious due to an inherent need to perform at high skill. Okay. Let me see how I can say. I'm saying we are conscious, let's say a conscious particle began moving, it had speed, okay? Eventually, it came to a point where it became rhythm. That means consciousness plus speed is rhythm, you can say. And consciousness has a kind of up and down kind of flow to it, a sort of cyclicalness to it. Because repetition is dependent on a cycle. The word repetition and the word repetitive and the word cyclical, these are like two gears in a machine that are moving each other, you know. They're both move. They're both suggesting sort of movement. You know. So as we became conscious, our evolution now then depended on our skill level. Our skill level was now being dictated by an idea of self. This idea of self was being dictated by how much objectively you had, in some sense, explored and experienced the world to restructure or uh, reshape your data to your current view. Do you know how many ways you have perceived this world since the beginning? Do you know that we were born into change just to realize the end is empty, but it's empty because the change will eventually stop? You have to feel truly alone. This is the sort of mystic's divine loneliness, as spoken about in Vedanta and many other mystical traditions. That the human being who was in society steps out of the game, steps out of the simulation. As the being steps out of the simulation, they come into the wilderness of loneliness. They find themselves alone at nature, similar to looking at the sky at night, alone, looking at the stars. If you've ever experienced looking at the stars, it is a moment of reverence. It is a moment where, just like how those stars stare at you, the sort of subjective notion of God stares at the religious man, the same kind of, you know, scientific, structured brilliance, stares back at the, scientist. We are creatures that express and receive. But our expression is based on how we receive, and how we receive is based on how we express. And we must find an alignment and a sort of balance between how much of our life is based on how much of the attention of the moment is directed towards subjective phenomena and how much of it is directed towards objective phenomena. We inherently wanted to become better because when we became better, the world was better. Now we have entered a system where we see that after, if we're not there yet, but if everybody reached the point where life was better, okay, we all as a species walk past the better line where we were in a better world, then you would see you could have always done it from the start. That moment where the fool is forgiven is where wisdom has now become a memory structure. The experience is now storified due to your active experiential participation in your life. So some thoughts, if you notice, you go and tell somebody an idea, if they don't speak the language, they will hear you, but they won't hear you. You know what I mean? It takes great effort to be patient enough for ignorance to turn into clarity. We have to save the world from how our eyes keep the world there. We have to, if the way we think about the world is the wrong idea, we're doomed. You see, that's the issue. When it's not, we're doomed into terror. We're doomed into emptiness. Everything is kept by emptiness. Everything goes to emptiness. For me, it's very simple. We are never our parts, but all of them together is one. Dots evolve into lines. Lines evolve into planes. Mankind is also similar. Our species evolves into the ultimate presence of intelligence, whatever that is. That is the command of the species. Evolve towards the ultimate, because there's one life to see it from. And it's very incredible, guys, because if you don't respect yourself, you will never understand your mind. You will never discover the depth of your intelligence. So you have to build a sort of samurai sort of honor with your own existence. That means your presence begins to matter to you. It begins to matter because your presence moves matter. Your attention aligns reality. And it also aligns how the subject, suddenly an object becomes a thought. Suddenly a thought is imprinted on an object. The issue is people feel world peace is so complex, so they don't bother trying to give an effort. But because we're creatures of communication, the right words in the right ears can change the world. Our communication is going to be our savior, because if we're doomed if we don't understand each other and we're violent. That's pretty much it. Another topic I definitely want to speak about in this talk is that I've been known to say in my other talks this statement, which is a very important statement for the minds of mankind. And this statement is that language is the next great of all languages. And I kind of feel I have to kind of take the responsibility of being one of the people to communicate a sort of very abstract inner structure and to kind of bring it to you. Here. Just listen to what I'm going to read. A line is not just a line, but the beginning of a plane. A line of life is not just a lifeline. It's not just a life. It's the beginning of a higher dimension. Just like you get 4 lines, you get a plane. So one line is the beginning of a new dimension, the plane. And I say the geometric secret to the linguistic simulation's walls. The pattern of geometry as a repetitive revelation of how the universe approaches the being. There's a geometric solution, or I've written here, like how I've spelled S-O-U-L-A, so S-O-U-L-U-T-I-O-N, solution, the solution. So the geometric secret to the linguistic simulation's walls, well actually I read that part here. There's a geometric solution and commonality between all dimensions of observable existence and the root problem. This is the purely geometric dimension, where existence in this awareness is geometric livelihood. Geometry is alive in repetitive patterns. And that's what I wanted to say, guys. There's a way to a person's mind, like a person can be alive in this world in a way where the secret to all problems is the continuation of a repetitive geometric pattern. That means we think we are many things. There's a way you can exist as just shape. Shape is the subtler dimension. It's the neighboring dimension beyond matter. It's like the bigger onion layer that's holding these other smaller onion layers. Yet beyond the geometric layer is again the unknown. So what all dimensions have in common, whenever the notion of multidimensional arises, imagine like different rooms are part of the same house. What they have in common is this: they're in the same ground. You see, they're in the same place. So all the different views you have of yourself are occurring in this moment. You see, they're in one place. Beyond thought, man is free. Um, just like how you can say, Carl Sagan in one of his videos on YouTube I saw, he in some sense spoke about the flatlands. And the flatlands is, imagine a world of 2D beings, suddenly a cube lands out of nowhere in their world, and suddenly a square has appeared in this 2D world out of nowhere. So in some sense this is the flatlanders idea. And the flatlanders is like a town of just flat 2D beings. Suddenly the third dimension is introduced. But the way the third dimension is introduced to their two dimensions is suddenly, for example, if you put a cube on a table, and the surface of the table was flat land, like this land I'm telling you of 2D beings. Like, this is what Carl Sagan was saying, that in some sense, to the 2D beings, it would be incomprehensible. So miracles will be uh, what in other dimensions makes sense, but cannot make sense to our dimension. And the higher dimensions, I feel they're not just like different rooms. That's more of like a sci-fi way. How actual higher dimensionality is for human beings is it leads towards non-conceptual emptiness. It oscillates between non-conceptual emptiness, like a sine wave, and then towards conceptual multiplicity and fulfillment. That means you want to shower yourself with beliefs because you're still in survival mode and you want to get as much as you can to feel good. That's fundamentally something that socially just arises when you stay in society together. The man who enters the forest is not the same man when he was in the city. The environment, if it honors you, the being gets energized. If it doesn't, it gets de-energized. Sometimes you see entrepreneurs working endlessly for hours. You see a lot of people applying hard effort and hard work to their process of life. Okay? Now, what inspires them is the reward. And so this reward mechanism really makes the person, and I find religion is common now because our survival has not become, let me tell you, the more life becomes luxurious and technological, the less you need a meaning to life because there's less pain to even wonder about the meaning. You need to suffer to truly see this life and not suffer imposing it on yourself arrogantly. Like what are some priests, like back in the day, some Gnostics would whip themselves because their pain was like the pain of, the prophet. Like I'm telling you, it's one of those things where you can get trapped in a loop of thought because, excuse me, you can be trapped in a loop of thought because you can't go any further. Yeah, you can't go any further. You believe something because you don't care to explore further. Beliefs are a sign of laziness. I mean, to be honest, what can you believe in a changing world? So this flatlander notion of 2D dimensional beings being simultaneously present in the same space as three-dimensional beings, yet not being able to comprehend, uh, similar to this idea, this sort of parallel pattern of how the mind starts at the beginning of the day from a singular point and then becomes multidimensional, extends itself out, and then comes back to a singular point. We begin to see the moment the 2D being enters the 3D being, the moment the person enters the stargate of a higher dimension, what occurs is that, in some sense, the point of meaning, goes to a singular point. All just like how all the cells of the caterpillar die before the cells of the butterfly emerge, all the meaning, subjective content of uh, one room of one view of reality all begin to, in some sense, die. And as they die, they come to a singular point. From that singular point, suddenly there's a movement into the new dimension. You enter the portal and you see the new world. Once you see the new world, you're the new self. That means some portals in the future in sci-fi settings can be designed that once you pass through them, you have no memory of what you passed through. I think if people seek eternal life, they'll get bored. If you seek immortality, it's boring. I'm telling you, it's boring because you gotta ride the waves. It's not about cultural value, social value. It's not about how people perceive the individual. It's about how the individual perceives the individual. But how does the individual perceive the individual? And once the individual wonders how the individual is kept, it discovers the collective. It begins to see its notion of self is sculpted out of its relationship with everything else, and just considering it as not. That means a person's awareness extends and their sophistication advances through how much they have observed the non-sophisticated, the simple. I forget his name, but there was this very hilarious, like he had a very nice humor, this Persian poet, you know, where they asked him, they told him, "Sir, you're very polite. How are you this polite? This level of politeness. How have you attained this level of politeness, sir?" And the guy says, "Easy, man. I just saw what the those who were impolite or not polite did, you know, and I did the opposite. He found what didn't work and he stayed away from it, and then his life began to work in a way. His dialect evolved to a better karma. Your communication ability is karma, by the way. How you use your words has an echo on the mind that express those words." Another Persian mystic poet from, like, I think, what is it, 900, 700 years ago, he said, "The words you speak become the language you live in." I was astonished when I heard that sentence because I had totally, I knew the idea before, but I'd never heard it in that way. That we contain objective phenomena in language as memories. And if you truly remember something, you realize the senses of your body behave to where your attention within you took you to what image. That means if you close your eyes right now and I tell you, imagine a sunny day, or let's say um, imagine a moment where um, a car passed you, okay? So if and you see what the memory brings for you, it might bring a memory. You might suddenly get a memory of a moment where, like a car passed you and it was daylight, it was in the day, or it was at night. But I'm just telling you, just the instantaneous attention to an abstract direction brought forth a sort of subtler image behind your eyes. Imagination came into existence. Our imagination is actually where the extraterrestrials are. It's an inner dimension to a world beyond the game of consciousness and matter, because that becomes mechanical. There was a yogi who went through 7,500 apocalypses, like the eternal personality of his soul went through 7,500 apocalypses, like end of ends, it's ends of time. He experienced like 7,500 times the end of time, the end of all time. Eventually, your story of life will come to a pattern. This pattern will echo in your memory. When it echoes in your memory, it will reach the edge of your memory, your consciousness of the moment, as an edge. That means, like, just like how you imagine if you were sitting in a room. I'm sitting in a room right now. So I'm sitting in a room of my awareness of how the world works and how the world is. So when you become aware of that, you see the areas that you need to improve in your own life. You don't become dependent on an outer teacher. This whole kind of like self-help, or even the guru notion, like holy guru sits on chair, disciples listen, like that is, what is that? That's weird, you know. For me, it's like more comrades in the same battlefield, but we're at war. We're in a, not at war, but we're in a sort of um, dance of chaos and order, of our knowledge of the unknown. And Che Guevara, this rebel, has a quote where he says, like at the end, it seemed like when he, like his last words, like there was an agent who was shooting him, like had a gun pointed to him. And Che Guevara looks at that agent and says, "Shoot, coward! Shoot, coward! You will kill me, but you will not kill an idea." Something like that, which is a scary thing for me to even think about it, because it's hard to be honest in a world that profits off lies and cruelty. When cruelty becomes entertainment, the world has become a lifeless machine. When violence is permitted, like we should try to end violence in developed countries and move all non-developed countries into developed. I'm not using the word developed in the general way. I'm using it in my own way, because a country develops based on the freedom it gives the individual's mind and the resources it provides for the collective's body, for all the people's body. That means your society is the point of the government. I find just the word government, it means govern. It comes from governance. What are you governing? So we see that we're governing the self of people. And the self of people requires the assistance of the world. This is why the compassionate king ruled in people's minds and memories much longer than the evil king. You see, there's a value to caring for a world that you're in just once in this form. If our whole lives are based on information, then we are creatures that we are a moment in formation. We're in a certain way. And because we're in a certain way, the world is in a certain way. You see? But when we see this certain way shifts, we suddenly recognize there are uncertain ways of being which permit us to have new discoveries. You can't experience something new if you don't sleep. Do you see what I'm saying? Do you see how our subjective landscapes are, in some sense, dynamically orchestrating themselves? The mind is a wondrous world because it is being the world. I hope this talk has served you. Much blessings. And namaste. Because beyond despair, beyond the hollow promise of subjective paradise, and beyond the endless dance of particles in empty space, we are life that saw itself, and we fulfilled our position. Or sometimes life doesn't have a purpose. It's like there isn't a mission. I mean, I kind of make these talks sound exciting, but I'm just trying to inspire sort of universal level of responsibility in people's minds. We have to be responsible not just for the universe in front of our eyes, but also the universe behind our eyes. The universe behind our eyes has been just sculpted based on our experiences. A lot of our experiences, just like how our heart and breath happens involuntarily, just naturally, we went through our experiences naturally. And sometimes nature is unconscious until it becomes conscious, and then it's like, oh my God, what have I become? Sometimes I remember when I was younger, I would get scared. Okay, something like I remember I saw this movie called Signs, like Mel Gibson was in it, and some other actor with aliens and cornfields and stuff. You know? And later on, when I studied evolution, I realized, oh my God, it took us like billions of years to be able to even be afraid as creatures, to be creatures that could even experience fear. So there was, it's very fascinating, but can we say the caveman was afraid? Could we ever say the caveman was afraid? Or was it just the movement of form in other, just a collision of particles before any sort of, sort of sophisticated meaning can be given? That means, like, imagine there's stuff on the table, and we move this stuff on the same table, okay? We move the stuff on the table, and we look at the table, and we say, has the table and the stuff changed? And we're like, no, still the same stuff. So you see, it's as if, like, particles moving in empty space is us moving all the stuff on this, like, kind of hypothetical table. Live for life, and you will live for life. Live for clarity, and the source of the world cannot be led astray. Free your mind. You can totally be who you are in every moment of your livelihood. You don't have to constantly adjust to the environment. A sort of meditation was to recognize that the child's mind is constantly challenged by conditions, by external conditions, the internal shifts, changes. But meditation was a state, enlightenment was a state where the internal did not change just with the external changing. The internal became, for the first time, unconditional. You were no longer contained in a belief of who you are. You are your moment, you are free, you are the expression of a world that turns around to see itself. Much blessings and namaste.